Playing with Power MTG. Powerful cards, powerful formats. Before we begin tonight's game, I wanted to ask a question. Do you have extra cards lying around that you don't use? Want to buy or trade for some extra cards but don't know how to maximize the value? Then you should try out today's sponsor, Card Conduit. Card Conduit is the best service when it comes to selling your extra cards. Don't waste hours trying to find the best buy list price for your cards online. Simply send them to Card Conduit and let them take care of the rest. I've used Card Conduit multiple times already. I always use them for getting the best value of my extra cards and my extra bulk. I get fair prices for my cards and they save me tons of time. They have three main services. Their standard service lets you send them unsorted cards of any value. They will sort, grade, and give you the best price for your cards, including your bulk. Their curated service is similar. Send them your unsorted cards worth over $1 in value. They will charge half of the fee of standard service and then charge no fee per card. Their new sorted service is a great value as well. Choose cards in advance with their selection tool, send them sorted to Card Conduit, and they will grade and buy list them automatically. Save yourself the time of having to send to multiple sites and let Card Conduit do it instead. Their fee is only 2% with no fee per card. So give Card Conduit a try today. If you sign up with my link in the description below or use the promo code POWER, you will also get 10% off of their fees when you use their service. A big thanks to Card Conduit for sponsoring today's video. Zach and Ryan are battling our Mox Pearls in another game, so let's see how they do tonight. So let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First we have Zach piloting the partner pair of Tymna the Weaver and Chrom Ludovic's Opus. This deck can win quickly with explosive turns or grind into the late game with its commanders. Zach's opening hand contains a Lion's Eye Diamond, Mana Crypt, Chrome Mox, Jataxian Probe, Mana Vault, Bloodstained Mire, and his London Mulligan is a Safine's Reclamation. Next we have Sean piloting Yennet, Cryptic Sovereign. This deck powers out its commander as soon as possible and tries to resolve a powerful spell off of the top of its library. Sean's opening hand contains a Mana Vault, Pact of Negation, Chrome Mox, Jeweled Lotus, Talisman of Progress, and his London Mulligans are Dark Ritual and Peer into the Abyss. After that we have Ryan piloting the partner pair of Tymna the Weaver and Jeska Thrice Reborn. This deck tries to cast Ad Nauseam as fast as possible. It then tries to create an infinite mana sink into Jeska. Ryan's opening hand contains a Grinding Station, Demonic Tutor, Hope of Ghirapur, Mox Diamond, Polluted Delta, Arid Mesa, and a Culling the Weak. Finally we have John piloting Anya Falkenrath. This deck uses Anya in conjunction with many Madness cards to attempt to resolve the World Gorger Dragon combo. John's opening hand contains a Command Tower, Luxury Suite, Soul Ring, and his London Mulligans are Scalding Tarn, Gorgon Recluse, and Alms of the Bane. Without further ado, let's kick off as Klutzy Kitty Kindergarten Karate Karaoke. Zach won Season 15 of RuPaul's Drag Race and gets to start us off. Zach draws a card for turn and plays a Bloodstained Mire. He pays 2 life to cast Jataxian Probe targeting Sean. He looks at Sean's hand and draws a card. He casts a Mana Crypt. He casts a Mana Vault. He casts a Chrome Mox, imprinting Mnemonic Betrayal. He cracks his Bloodstained Mire, pays a life, and fetches up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. He casts a turn 1 Ad Nauseam. The table asks if anyone has any free interaction, but sadly no one does. Ad Naus resolves and Zach reveals an Intuition, Demonic Tutor, Chain of Vapor, Scalding Tarn, Mox Opal, Deflecting Swat, Pact of Negation, Marsh Flats, Esper Sentinel, Tainted Pact, Peer into the Abyss, Thassa's Oracle, Badlands, Arid Mesa, Time Twister, Spire of Industry, Wishclaw Talisman, Hallowed Fountains, Tarnished Citadel, Gamble, Counterbalance, and a Brain Freeze, deciding to stop there. He casts Mox Opal. He casts Lion's Eye Diamond. He casts Chain of Vapor, targeting his own Mana Crypt. He sacks his only land and continues the chain, bouncing Mox Opal to his hand. He recasts Mana Crypt. He recasts Mox Opal. He casts Demonic Tutor. He holds priority, sacrifices his LED, discards his hand, and adds 3 red. He fetches up a card into his hand. He casts Underworld Breach. He escapes LED from his graveyard. He cracks it for 3 blue. He escapes LED again. He cracks it for 3 black. He escapes Thassa's Oracle. Oracle enters, and with a trigger on the stack, Zach escapes Tainted Pact. He exiles his entire library. Oracle's trigger resolves, and Zach wins the game. Okay, holy smokes, so literally a turn 1 win there. That was amazing. The team had, well, plenty left in their tanks, so they decided to go again. In this game, Sean brings back Yennet, Cryptic Sovereign, and his opening hand contains a Marsh Flats, Soul Ring, Sensei's Divining Top, Miscast, Talisman of Dominance, Elesh Norn Grand Cenobite, and an Alchemist's Retrieval. Ryan brings back Tymna the Weaver and Jeska Thrice Reborn, and his opening hand contains a Jeweled Lotus, Reanimate, Talisman of Hierarchy, Arcane Signet, Sacred Foundry, Underworld Breach, and his London Mulligan is a Flame Scroll Celebrant. John brings back Anya Falkenrath, and his opening hand contains a Luxury Suite, Arid Mesa, Emergence Zone, Mox Diamond, Avacyn's Judgment, and his London Mulligans are Marsh Flats and Fiery Temper. Zach brings back Tymna the Weaver and Crom Ludovic's Opus, and his opening hand contains an Ancient Tomb, Talisman of Dominance, Chrome Mox, Time Twister, Swan Song, Chain of Vapor, and a Red Elemental Blast. And Sean gets to start us off. Sean draws and plays a Marsh Flats. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Tundra onto the battlefield. He casts a Sol Ring. He casts a Talisman of Dominance. He passes. Ryan draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. He taps it to cast Talisman of Hierarchy. He casts a Jeweled Lotus. He taps his Talisman and cracks his Lotus to help cast his commander, Tymna the Weaver. Ryan ends his turn. John draws and plays an Arid Mesa. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Badlands onto the battlefield. He casts Mox Diamond, discarding Emergence Zone. John gives the turn to Zach. Zach draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. He taps it to help cast Talisman of Dominance. He casts Chrome Mox, imprinting Red Elemental Blast. Zach ships the turn. Sean draws and plays an island. He taps his Talisman to help cast his commander, Yenneck, Cryptic Sovereign. Sean passes the turn. Ryan draws and moves straight to combat. He attacks Zach with Tymna. Zach takes it, and Ryan gains 2 life. In his second main phase, Ryan pays 1 life and draws a card through Tymna. He plays a Sacred Foundry into play untapped, paying 2 life. He taps his Ancient Tomb to help cast Arcane Signet. Ryan sends it over to John. John draws and plays a Luxury Suite. He casts his commander, Anya Falkenrath. John passes. At the end of John's turn, Zach casts Chain of Vapor, bouncing Yenneck back to Sean's hand. Zach draws and taps his Ancient Tomb to help cast Dockside Extortionist. It enters and Zach creates 5 treasures. He casts Time Twister. Each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library and draws 7. Zach looks at his hand and just loves what he just drew. He plays an Underground Seat for turn. He casts Tainted Pact. Pact resolves and Zach exiles until he finds Thassa's Oracle and puts it into his hand. He casts Thassa's Oracle. In response, John activates Anya, discarding Psychotic Episode, untapping Anya and drawing a card. He activates Anya, discarding Nightshade Assassin, untapping Anya, drawing again. He activates Anya, discarding From Under the Floorboards and untapping Anya and drawing a card. He activates Anya, discarding Arid Mesa, drawing a card. Unfortunately, he could not find an answer, and Thoracle resolves. Thoracle enters, and with the trigger on the stack, Zach casts Demonic Consultation. In response, Sean casts Pact of Negation. In response, Zach, having it all, casts Force of Will, paying a life and exiling a blue card, countering Pact of Negation. With no other answers, Consultation resolves. Zach exiles his entire library. Oracle's trigger resolves, and Zach wins the game. Again. Well then, at least the team made it to turn 2 this time. Let's get back in there. In this game, Ryan's opening hand contains a Rite of Flame, Wooded Foothills, Spectator Seating, Badlands, Chrome Mox, Sol Ring, and a Dualcaster Mage. In this game, John's opening hand contains a Chrome Mox, Jeweled Lotus, Dockside Extortionist, Strength of Lunacy, Senseless Rage, Asylum Visitor, and his London Mulligan is a Sudden Spoiling. In this game, Zach's opening hand contains a Mental Misstep, Imperial Seal, Ragavan Nimble Pilferer, Dark Ritual, Marsh Flats, and his London Mulligans are Mnemonic Betrayal and Thassa's Oracle. In this game, Sean's opening hand contains a Gilded Drake, Mana Confluence, Sol Ring, Whispering Madness, Tainted Pact, Demonic Tutor, and his London Mulligan is a Grand Abolisher. And Ryan gets to start us off. Ryan draws and starts off his turn by casting Chrome Mox, imprinting Dualcaster Mage. He plays a Badlands for turn. He casts a Sol Ring. He casts his commander, Jeska, Thrice Reborn. It enters with a loyalty counter, and Ryan ends his turn. John draws and casts a Chrome Mox, imprinting Senseless Rage. He casts a Jeweled Lotus. He cracks his Lotus to help cast his commander, Anya Falkenrath. He activates Anya, discarding a Silent Visitor, untapping Anya, and drawing a card. He plays a Bloodstained Mire for turn. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Badlands onto the battlefield. He activates Anya, discarding Strength of Lunacy, untapping Anya, and drawing a card. He activates Anya, discarding Revolutionist, untapping Anya, and drawing a card. With a powerful start already underway, John passes to Zach. Zach draws and plays a Marsh Flats. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Badlands onto the battlefield. He casts Imperial Seal. He fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. Zach passes. Sean draws and plays a Mana Confluence. He taps it to cast a Sol Ring. Sean ends his turn. Ryan draws and plays a Spectator Seating. He casts his other commander, Tymna the Weaver. Ryan passes. At the end of Ryan's turn, John casts Vampiric Tutor. In response, Zach pays 2 life to help cast Mental Misstep, countering Tutor. The turn moves to John. John draws and plays a Gemstone Mine. He activates Anya, discarding Rite of Flame, drawing a card. John ships the turn to Zach. Zach draws and casts Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer. Zach passes. Sean draws and taps his Mana Confluence to cast Demonic Tutor. He fetches up a card into his hand. He plays a Scrubland for turn. He casts Dark Ritual, adding 3 black. He casts Necropotence. He activates Necropotence, paying 11 life and exiling 11 cards. He moves to his end step, putting the Necro cards into his hand. He passes, discarding to hand size, exiling the discarded cards. Ryan draws and activates Jeska's second ability, killing Zach's Ragavan. He moves to combat, attacking Sean with Tymna. Sean takes it, and Ryan gains 2 life. In his second main phase, Ryan pays 1 life and draws a card through Tymna. He plays a Command Tower for turn. He recasts his commander, Jeska, Thrice Reborn, entering with 3 counters. Ryan passes. John draws and casts Dockside Extortionist. It enters and John creates 4 treasures. He casts Imperial Seal. He fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. He activates Anya, discarding Cabal Ritual and drawing a card. He casts Wheel of Fortune. In response, Zach exiles Simian Spirit Guide from his hand, adding a red. Then each player discards their hand, Sean exiles the discarded cards through Necropotence, and then each player draws 7. With nothing else, John passes. Before his mana fades, Zach casts Lightning Bolt, killing Ryan's Tymna. Zach draws and plays a City of Brass. He taps it to cast Talisman of Dominance. Zach passes. Sean skips his draw step due to Necropotence. He plays a Morphic Pool for turn. He casts Rhystic Study. He activates Necropotence, paying 5 life and exiling 5 cards. He moves to his end step and puts the Necro cards into his hand. He passes, discarding to hand size, exiling the discarded cards. Ryan draws and activates Jessica's second ability where X equals 3, targeting Anya, Dockside, and Sean. Both creatures die, and then Ryan casts Jeweled Lotus, paying for Rhystic. He casts an Esper Sentinel, paying the Rhystic tax again. He casts his commander, Tymna the Weaver, paying the Rhystic again. He casts a Lotus Petal, and then lets Sean finally draw off of Rhystic. Haul through, Ryan passes to John. John draws and starts off his turn by casting Underworld Breach. Esper and Rhystic trigger, and Sean and Ryan draw. The table is unsure about what to do, so they decide to let Breach resolve. John escapes Dockside Extortionist. Rhystic triggers, and in response, Sean casts Vampiric Tutor. Esper triggers, and Ryan draws. Then Tutor resolves, and Sean fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. Then Sean draws off of Rhystic. With Dockside still on the stack, Sean casts Force of Will, paying a life and exiling a blue card, countering Dockside. Unfortunately, this was perfectly timed interaction, and John is really squeezed on his resources. So John escapes Jeweled Lotus. Rhystic triggers, and Sean draws. He cracks it for 3 red. He escapes Jeweled Lotus again, and Sean draws off of Rhystic. He cracks it for 3 black. He recasts his commander, Anya Falconwrath. Rhystic triggers, and Sean draws. John activates Anya, discarding Murderous Compulsion, Reckless Worm, and Distemper of Blood, untapping Anya each time and drawing a card. He plays a Polluted Delta for turn. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Blood Crypt into play untapped, paying 2 life. He activates Anya, discarding Fiery Temper, untapping Anya and drawing a card. He activates Anya, discarding Muckdrub, untapping Anya and drawing again. He casts a Mana Crypt. Rhystic triggers, and Sean draws. He casts Shadow of the Grave. Rhystic triggers, and Sean draws again. This is definite gas for John, so in response, Sean taps his Mana Confluence to help cast Swan Song. In response, John activates Anya, discarding Mox Diamond, drawing a card, looking for an answer. Unfortunately, he could not find what he needed, and Swan Song resolves. Swan Song counters Shadow, and John creates a 2/2 bird. Unfortunately stopped in 2 key areas, John passes the turn, sacrificing Underworld Breach. Zach draws and taps the City of Brass to cast his commander, Tymna the Weaver. Rhystic triggers, and Sean draws. Zach passes. Sean skips his draw step due to Necropotence. He plays an island for turn. He casts Mox Opal. Esper triggers, and Ryan draws. Sean casts a Lotus Petal. He casts his commander, Yennet, Cryptic Sovereign. He activates Necropotence 4 times, paying 4 life, exiling 4 cards. He moves to his end step and puts the Necro cards into his hand. He passes, discarding to hand size, exiling the discarded cards. Ryan draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. He taps it to help recast his commander, Jeska. He activates Jeska's second ability, removing all counters targeting Tymna, Yennet, and Sean. Both creatures die, and Ryan moves to combat. He attacks Zach with Esper and Sean with Tymna. In response, Sean casts Cyclonic Rift, targeting Tymna. Esper triggers, and Ryan draws. Tymna bounces, and then Zach takes the hit. Ryan passes, discarding Tymna to hand size, moving it to the command zone. During his upkeep, John wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and activates Anya, discarding Geese's Bidding, Ecor's Lick, and Curse of Fool's Wisdom, untapping Anya each time and drawing a card. He casts Impact Tremors. Rhystic and Esper trigger, and Sean and Ryan draw. He casts Entomb. Rhystic triggers, and Sean draws again. John fetches up a World Gorger Dragon into his graveyard. He casts Dance of the Dead, targeting World Gorger Dragon. Rhystic triggers, and Sean draws. Ryan asks if anyone has anything to deal with this since it's now game over and no one has an answer. So, Dance of the Dead resolves. World Gorger enters the battlefield. World Gorger's first ability and Impact Tremors both trigger. Everyone takes 1 from Impact Tremors. With the World Gorger trigger still in the stack, Ryan flashes in a Cathar Commando. Rhystic triggers, and Sean draws. In response, John activates Anya, discarding Call of the Netherworld, untapping Anya. He casts it, targeting Muckdrub in his graveyard. Rhystic triggers, and Sean draws. He returns Muckdrub to his hand. He then draws from Anya. He activates Anya, discarding Psychotic Haze, untapping Anya and drawing a card. He activates Anya, discarding Muckdrub, untapping Anya and drawing again. Unfortunately, he could not find an answer, and Cathar Commando resolves. Ryan activates Cathar Commando, sacrificing it and destroying Dance of the Dead. Dance of the Dead triggers, and John sacrifices World Gorger Dragon. World Gorger Dragon's second ability triggers, but there is nothing to return since nothing has been exiled yet. Then John floats mana from his Gemstone Mine, removing its final counter and sacrificing it. Then World Gorger's first ability resolves, and John exiles his entire board, moving Anya to the command zone. He plays a swamp and regretfully passes the turn. During his upkeep, Zach taps his City of Brass to cast Enlightened Tutor. Rhystic and Esper trigger, and Sean and Ryan draw. Then Zach fetches up a Mana Crypt onto the top of his library. He draws and casts Mana Crypt. Rhystic triggers and Sean draws. Zach taps his Talisman to help cast Demonic Betrayal. Rhystic triggers and Sean draws again. In response, Sean taps his Mana Confluence to help cast Miscast. Esper triggers and Ryan draws. Then Miscast counters Betrayal and Zach gives the turn to Sean. Sean skips his draw step due to Necropotence. He plays a Sea of Clouds for turn. He casts Grand Abolisher. He casts Mystical Tutor. Esper triggers and Ryan draws. He fetches up a Demonic Consultation onto the top of his library. He casts a Scroll Rack. He activates Scroll Rack, exiling 9 cards, putting 9 cards into his hand, and rearranging the exiled cards onto the top of his library. He passes, discarding the hand size, exiling the discarded cards. Ryan draws and starts off his turn by casting Vanishing Burst, targeting Rhystic Study. Rhystic triggers and Sean draws. With no answers, Rhystic is exiled. Ryan casts Cabal Ritual with Threshold, adding 5 black. He casts Ad Nauseam. In response, Sean casts what he has, which is a Spell Pierce targeting Naws. It resolves, and Ryan taps his Ancient Tomb to pay for Spell Pierce. With no other answers, Ad-Naus resolves. Ryan reveals a Fragmentize, Talisman of Hierarchy, Scalding Tarn, Simian Spirit Guide, Underworld Breach, Imperial Seal, Vampiric Tutor, Shatterskull Smashing, Talisman of Indulgence, Dark Ritual, Mana Crypt, Demonic Tutor, Blood Crypt, Pyroblast, Tainted Pact, Cloudstone Curio, Reign of Filth, Mox Diamond, Mox Opal, Phyrexian Tower, Ragavan Nimble Pilferer, City of Brass, and an Auriok Salvagers, deciding to stop there. He casts a Mana Crypt. He casts Mox Diamond, discarding Blood Crypt. He casts Mox Opal. He plays a City of Brass for turn. He casts Cloudstone Curio. He casts Underworld Breach. He taps his City of Brass to escape Dockside Extortionist from his graveyard. It enters, and Ryan creates 6 treasures. Cloudstone Curio triggers, and Ryan returns Esper Sentinel to his hand. Ryan cracks a treasure to cast Esper Sentinel. Curio triggers, and Ryan bounces Dockside to his hand. Ryan presents a loop of bouncing and recasting both Dockside and Esper Sentinel, getting more and more treasures each time. With this loop, he creates infinite mana. Ryan presents another loop of casting Jeska, Thrice Reborn, and activating her second ability, dealing more and more damage to each opponent. He does this over and over until the table is dead, and Ryan wins the game. In this game, John's opening hand contains a Badlands, Scalding Tarn, Blood Crypt, Reckless Worm, Deflecting Swat, and his London Mulligans are Brain Gorgers and Dark Withering. In this game, Zach's opening hand contains a Mana Vault, Gemstone Caverns, Sensei's Divining Top, Counterbalance, Badlands, Brainstorm, and his London Mulligan is a Praetor's Grasp. In this game, Sean's opening hand contains a Flooded Strand, Underground River, Mana Drain, Lightning Greaves, Dark Ritual, Mana Crypt, and a Mental Misstep. And in this game, Ryan's opening hand contains a Marsh Flats, Dockside Extortionist, Cathar Commando, Swords to Plowshares, Badlands, Enlightened Tutor, and a Lightning Bolt. And John gets to start us off. But Zach has a pre-game action, putting Gemstone Caverns onto the battlefield, exiling Badlands. John draws and plays a Badlands. He passes. At the end of John's turn, Zach casts a turn 0 Brainstorm, which feels super nice. He draws 3 and puts 2 back on top. Zach draws and plays a Mana Confluence. He casts a Mana Vault. In response, Sean pays 2 life to cast Mental Misstep, countering Vault. Next, Zach taps his Mana Confluence to cast Sensei's Divining Top. Zach ends his turn. Sean draws and plays an Arid Mesa. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Tundra onto the battlefield. He casts a Mana Crypt. He casts a Lightning Greaves. Sean gives the turn to Ryan. Ryan draws, plays a Marsh Flats, and passes. John draws and plays a Scalding Tarn. He ends his turn. Zach draws and taps his Mana Confluence to help cast Counterbalance. In response, Ryan cracks his Marsh Flats, pays a life, and fetches up a Plateau onto the battlefield. He casts an Enlightened Tutor. He fetches up a Mana Crypt onto the top of his library. Then Counterbalance resolves. Zach, sitting in a really good position, passes to Sean. During his upkeep, Sean wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and plays a Flooded Strand. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. Sean gives the turn to Ryan. Ryan draws and plays a Badlands. He casts a Mana Crypt. Counterbalance triggers, and in response, John cracks his Scalding Tarn, pays a life, and fetches up a Snow-Covered Mountain onto the battlefield. Then Counterbalance trigger resolves, and Zach reveals a Tainted Pact. Then Mana Crypt resolves. Ryan casts his commander, Timna the Weaver. Ryan ends his turn. John draws and plays a Blood Crypt, into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts his commander, Anya Falconwrath. He activates Anya, discarding Stensia Masquerade, untapping Anya, and drawing a card. He activates Anya, discarding Blood Mad Vampire, untapping Anya, and drawing again. John sends it over to Zach. Zach draws and taps his Mana Confluence to help cast Talisman of Creativity. Zach passes. During his upkeep, Sean loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays a Command Tower. He casts his commander, Yennet, Cryptic Sovereign. He activates Lightning Greaves, targeting his commander. In response, Zach taps his talisman to help cast Chain of Vapor, bouncing in it back to Sean's hand. Unfortunately disrupted, Sean passes to Ryan. During his upkeep, Ryan wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and plays a Cavern of Souls, naming Human as it enters. He moves to combat and attacks Zach with Tymna. Zach takes it, and Ryan gains 2 life. In his second main phase, Ryan pays a life and draws a card through Tymna. Ryan gives the turn to John. John draws and casts a Soul Ring. Counterbalance triggers, and Zach reveals a Jeweled Lotus. John casts Imperial Seal. Counterbalance triggers, and in response, Zach activates his Sensei's Divining Top, drawing a card and putting top on top. Then he reveals Sensei's Divining Top through Counterbalance, countering Imperial Seal. Next, John activates Anya, discarding Dark Withering, untapping Anya, and drawing a card. He activates Anya, discarding Reckless Worm, Murderous Compulsion, Anya's Ravager, and Brain Gorgers, untapping Anya each time and drawing a card. Finished up, John passes. At the end of John's turn, Ryan flashes in Cathar Commando. He activates Commando, sacrificing it, destroying Zach's counterbalance. The turn moves to Zach. Zach draws and casts Jeweled Lotus. He cracks it and taps his talisman to help cast his commander, Crom Ludovic's Opus. Zach passes. During his upkeep, Sean loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays an Underground River. He casts Dark Ritual, adding 3 black. He casts Wandering Archaic. Crom triggers and Zach draws. Next, Sean activates Lightning Greaves, targeting Archaic. In response, Ryan casts Swords to Plowshares, targeting Wandering Archaic. Archaic triggers, and Ryan does not pay. Sean creates a copy of Swords to Plowshares. Sean states that he intends to target Zach's Crom. Zach reasons with Sean, asking him to choose a different target. With Crom, Zach will still be able to meaningfully interact in this game. Zach says otherwise, Ryan and John will run away with the game. Sean, remembering the previous games tonight, decides that Crom is the choice. Swords to Plowshares targets Crom. Crom is exiled and Zach gains 4 life. With Swords still on the stack, Sean casts Mana Drain, targeting Swords. In response, John casts Deadly Rollick for its alternate cost, targeting Wandering Archaic. Archaic triggers and John pays. Archaic is exiled and Mana Drain counters Swords. Sean moves to a second main phase and adds a colorless through Mana Drain. He has nothing to do with his mana, so he lets it fade and passes the turn. During his upkeep, Ryan wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and moves to combat. He attacks Sean with Tymna. Sean takes it and Ryan gains 2 life. In his second main phase, Ryan pays a life and draws a card through Tymna. He plays a Flooded Strand for turn. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a scrubland onto the battlefield. He casts Dockside Extortionist. It enters and Ryan creates 4 treasures. Ryan then casts Peer into the Abyss. In response, John casts Deflecting Swat for its alternate cost, targeting Peer. Ryan, with no answers, sinks his head. Swat resolves, redirecting Peer to John. Then Peer resolves, and then John draws half of his library and loses half of his life, rounded up. Ryan, with no other actions, passes to John. At the end of Ryan's turn, John activates Anya, discarding From Under the Floorboards. Anya triggers, and in response, Ryan casts Lightning Bolt, targeting Anya. In response, John exiles Simian Spirit Guide from his hand and adds a red. He casts Imp's Mischief, targeting Bolt. Mischief resolves, redirecting Bolt to Tymna, and John loses 1 life. Tymna dies, and then Anya untaps and John draws. John activates Anya, discarding Senseless Rage and Strength of Lunacy, untapping Anya and drawing each time. He activates Anya, discarding Blazing Root Walla. He casts it for its madness cost. He then untaps Anya and draws a card. He activates Anya, discarding Fiery Temper, Malevolent Whispers, Archfiend of Spite, Grave Scrabbler, Violent Eruption, Ecor Slick, Psychotic Haze, Bloodhall Priest, Biting Rain, Terminal Agony, Curse of Fool's Wisdom, Big Game Hunter, Gibbering Descent, Revolutionist, Geese's Bidding, Insatiable Gorgers, Asylum Visitor, Distemper of the Blood, Voldaren Pariah, Gorgon Recluse, and Muckdrub, untapping Anya and drawing each time. Finally, he activates Anya, discarding Gemstone Caverns, draws a card, and moves to his turn. John draws and plays a Luxury Suite. He casts a Mana Crypt. He casts a Lotus Petal. He casts Dark Ritual, adding 3 black. He casts Cloudstone Curio. He casts Dockside Extortionist. It enters and John creates 4 treasures. Curio triggers and John bounces Blazing Root Walla back to his hand. He casts Blazing Root Walla. Curio triggers and he bounces Dockside back to his hand. John presents a loop of casting and bouncing Dockside and Root Walla, netting more and more treasures each time. He creates infinite mana. He casts Entomb, fetching up a Mayhem Devil into his graveyard. He casts Dance of the Dead, returning Mayhem to the battlefield tapped. John proceeds to sacrifice treasures, triggering Mayhem Devil, pinging his opponents. He does this over and over until the table is dead, and John wins the game. Ladies and gentlemen, what a wild night. Congrats to Zach, Ryan, and John on their wins. In games 1 and 2, Zach had the perfect set of hands. His turn 1 win was amazing because sometimes you just get the perfect hand to win the game immediately. His time twister in Game 2 was extremely lucky as well. Sometimes games just go that way. In Game 3, the entire table was jockeying for position the whole time. Rhystic Studies, Underworld Breach, and Necropotence were all threats that had to be dealt with. Ryan stayed patient, let his opponents interact, and then went for it when the time was right. In Game 4, the game started off slow with a counterbalance threat on the table. Ryan positioned himself to win, but John absolutely wrecked him with the perfect answer to this game-winning peer. John grabbed his moment and turned that into a win tonight. A special mention to Sean. His Yennett deck was threatening all night, but just ended up being a smidge too slow for the pod this evening. Even against these odds, Sean was still the threat to be answered multiple times throughout the evening. If you like this video, please give it a like. If you want to see more like this, please consider subscribing. It only takes 2 seconds and does so much for us in return. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time when we duke it out to see who will be king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.